So we're going to be looking at the final topic today, understanding layouts in CSS3 and modern features. Yes, one of the major things you must understand is that if you're, no matter how you do your text, your images and everything, if your site is not properly laid out, CSS3 will not really find you very amazing. That's the truth of the matter. If your site is not well laid out, CSS3, your website will still not be okay. Layout is talking about how you organize and structure HTML elements in your web page using CSS. Are we together? How you structure HTML elements, in how you set up and arrange HTML elements on your web page using CSS. Now, mastering modern layout engines. There are two modern layout engines that CSS3 introduced. We have the Flexbox and the Grid. Alongside modern CSS3 specification additions, subgrid, viewports, height/width variations, and native CSS nesting. Now, Flexbox layout engine. Flexbox, flexible box layout engine, is optimized for one-dimensional layouts along either a row or a column as the CS. Flexbox is arranged for a one-dimensional layout pattern, whereby you either arrange elements from left to right, right to left, up to down, or down to up. That is how it works. That's how Flexbox works. It's one-dimensional, only moves in one particular direction. That's how the Flexbox works. Yes, it only moves in one particular direction. So we can look at some of the properties available in it. Now we have, let's say we have a navigation bar with class flex-nav. The first thing you must declare is display ratio flex. If you are using grid, what we have here is display ratio grid. But if you are using flex, you should have display ratio flex. It's a flexible layout and it arranges things in one direction, right to left, left to right, top to bottom, or bottom to top. And then we have flex direction equal to row. That means you want the HTML elements to be arranged along the row. And there are the options you can use there. We have row hyphen reverse, meaning that if instead of arranging from left to right, with row hyphen reverse, it will arrange from right to left. With column, it will arrange from top to bottom. But with column hyphen reverse, which is this final property here, it's going to arrange from bottom to to top. It can turn the elements upside down, like tumbling the elements entirely. Okay, then justify hyphen content space hyphen between. You are talking about the space, the distribution, the space between the various elements. That is what justify hyphen content does. The space between the various elements is what justify hyphen content does. Then axis distribution. We have flex. Now for space, for this one now, the justify hyphen content, what are the values that we have? We have flex hyphen start, flex hyphen end, center, space between, and space around. So if you say flex hyphen start, it's going to come up with, you will have to pass a measurement also to tell it how it's going to do. But basically what it just does is it's concerned about how to arrange the contents on the flex. Align hyphen items hyphen center. So you use this to align items. Cross axis alignment. Axis alignment is talking about x and y axis. Y cross axis is like, diagonal arrangement. And in the you also have the same features. And you have features like flex hyphen start, flex hyphen end, center, and then stretch. Then we have flex hyphen wrap. Wraps items on small screens. So if your text is so long on small streets, what wrap does is that on small screens it will take it to the next line. Okay, that's what wrap does. So flex hyphen wrap, it wraps items on small screens. So if it's a small screen, when it enters your site, it just takes content to the next line when it gets to the end of line. So the user does not have a bad user experience of scrolling to the left and to the right. Then we have the background. Of course, we know what background is. We have used it over and over to give a background color to something, to an element. And padding, which we say is the internal spacing, internal margin. Margin is the outer margin. Then flex items hyphen grow. Now this is for the flex box itself. All these styles that we applied here are used way on the flex box itself, where the main flex on the container that is covering all the elements that are going to use the flex box layout. That's what all these styles are for. Now when you want to deal with the individual items in the flex, that's the HTML elements now present in the flex, you have .flex hyphen grow. Flex hyphen grow 1 means that it will fill the remaining space. Flex hyphen shrink shrinks when the space is restricted, and flex initial default what sizing. So basically what this does for you, what this does is that flex items are the HTML, various HTML elements, your headings, your paragraphs, images, divs, etc. that are inside the container where the flex layout, display layout is going to be used. And then we have flex-item-custom, align-self flex. This will override align-items as we have it on the Flexbox itself. So you must take note. We can't really understand this now until we get to the class, but this is just a way of explaining. Then we now have the grid layout engine. Now look at how the CSS Grid is a powerful two-dimensional layout engine capable of managing both columns and rows what simultaneously. Are we together? Yes. Unlike while the Flexbox is one-dimensional, the grid layout engine is two-dimensional. Perfectly two what dimensional. It can go either, it can manage rows and columns efficiently simultaneously without any form of what problem. So you could, and it is perfect, it is a very good, but both layouts are actually good in their own way, and they, based on your skill capacity and how good you are at what you do, you will be able to manipulate them effectively. And these are some of the properties that you get in the grid. Okay, you can see now, you see, like I told you, we on the class where that is going to carry that grid, we usually use grid for things like dashboard, but dashboards sometimes don't have a permanent one-dimensional layout. Some places you can have 3 items aligned on a line, you can have 5 items aligned on that line, so dashboards, most of the time dashboards, we're talking of control panel for applications. Example of dashboards, let me just quickly use maybe Bing to show us what some dashboards, some application dashboards, so you can understand what we are saying about dashboards. Application dashboards, due to the dashboard design. Now you can see this is an example, a very quality example of a dashboard. You see, dashboards do not have a permanent, cannot work when you are dealing with dashboards. When dealing with dashboards, you can see there is no permanent strategy. Like dashboards are usually requiring different kinds of info from you. Now this is what we have here. Look at this dashboard now that we have here. Up here you have up to 4, you have about 5 different sections up here, all aligned together. Here you have 3, here you have 4, just like that. So one thing about dashboard layouts that is that because of the complexity of their look, you cannot use a Flexbox for them. You cannot work in a one-dimensional layout. Are we together? They are usually complicated to make use of. They cannot work in a one-dimensional layout. That is for dashboard. So you use that to, I brought that up so you can understand why the grid is very, very important. When you are doing a very straightforward application without too many complications on the interface, use a Flexbox layout. But when you are dealing with something like a dashboard, I advise you to use a grid layout. Okay. Now grid template columns, we can say repeat 3 column explicit layout using fractional units, 1 FR. So if you declare something like this, you are just telling that you need 3 columns. If you can also do 4, you can also do 5, 6, depending on what you want to do. Then grid template rows auto, meaning that on the rows, create the templates as needed. I don't need to manually create them each and every one. Then gap is talking about the gap, the distance, the space between each of the grid elements. Okay, named grid areas, these are areas in the grid that are named. Okay, you see grid template we have header, sidebar, main, footer. Now this is where you now make use of them. Grid item area assignments, grid header, grid area equal to header, grid sidebar equal to sidebar, grid main equals to. So this way now you can easily reference each of these guys as you need them. These are classes basically. They are just classes and you can call them into your CSS. You understand this better when we do our classwork. Responsive grid. Now a responsive grid, now you can use grid responsively without doing media queries, which is very important that you know. You see dot auto hyphen fit hyphen grid, display ratio grid, grid hyphen template hyphen columns. You see this, repeat in bracket auto fit comma min max 250 pixel 1 f arrow gap 15 pixel. Like this now, you don't need to bother yourself about at media screen 768 and max width 768 pixel. No, you don't need to bother yourself at things like that. You just follow this, it will just automatically adjust and optimize your website for why. This is one of the reasons why the grid layout is usually more favored than the Flexbox layout, due to the level of the dynamic nature of the grid layout. Now, modern CSS3 features. CSS3 introduced certain things. We have the subgrid. One, subgrid enables nested grid children to participate directly in the parent's grid what alignment track. Yes, just the way we have grid now. You can see when we did Flexbox, there was Flexbox hyphen items. We also had grid hyphen items. So we're just saying that in subgrid we allow a nested grid. We allow a nested grid children to participate directly in the parent from the parents grid alignment track. So the way you align the parents, you don't need to repeat your code again. With the help of subgrid, it can be repeated. Modern browsers support dynamic mobile address bar responsive unit. So we have things like small viewport where mobile address bars are expanded. Okay, large viewport where mobile address bars retract, and then dynamic viewer scales live as browser UI controls expand or shrink. This is the default. This third one. So these are just new features in CSS3, and hopefully you hardly will ever need to make use of these features, but it's important that we pass this knowledge to you and you understand what they're doing. And native CSS styling style hierarchical structures cleanly without requiring SAS or pre-processor. So you can see something here. I always put the code here. Those are not the real code. It's a classwork that is meant to be in your project. These codes here are just to show you what we are doing. One dynamic viewport fixes mobile full screen modal scrolling box. Full screen hero. You see width 100 dvw. Dynamic viewport width. That's what this dvw means. Yes, dynamic viewport width. This way it will automatically adjust as is needed. Height 100 dvh. Dynamic viewport height. That only adjusts to the mobile address bar states. And then background, you have this, and you have color white. Subgrid card hyphen grid display ratio grid hyphen template hyphen columns repeats 3,1 fr 1 fraction and give a gap of 20 pixels across each. So now when you say this, when you do this like this, then when you do this like this, because you have display ratio grid here, then the card hyphen item itself now, you have that here. Grid hyphen template hyphen row subgrid inherits the row tracking size from dot card grid, and then grid row span tree. It's just going to you do this to not have to rewrite the code again. That's just the thing. You just take it automatically from the parent element. Same thing with the nav card. All of these things are not things you are going to get to use that often. You get to me, but it's important that you know them and take note of them. But these are just the purpose of Flexbox and Grid generally is to help you build mobile responsive websites without having to make use of media queries. Yes, without having to make use of media queries. And it also helps you, Flexbox and Grid or layout also help you to achieve very, very complex layouts. There are some applications that require very, very highly complicated layouts, and with the help of Flexbox and Grid, it makes this much more easier for you. So that is for that. So now let's quickly do the classwork for this. Please, I'll copy the HTML. The HTML. Okay, replace what is here, everything in the body. Okay, we copy the HTML. We're trying to do a pricing table, pricing container, and then we'll come here to copy the CSS like I told us. Oh, sorry, that's my bad. So we'll go to style.css. We already know how we linked this. We go back to the last section. Yeah, and that is it. Let's first see what is happening here, what we achieved here, and then let's see. You see what has taken place here. Now let's see something. Let's do something more tools, developer tools. Okay, you see, as soon as the size of the screen change, what happens? Automatically, each of the items adjusted the same. This is only possible with the help of a grid and a flexbox. Their job is basically to adjust your to help you reduce the use of media queries in whatever you are doing. Okay, now take a look at this our index. Look at the structure of it. We have div class equal to pricing container, a div that carries all the other elements. Then we now have div class equal to price hyphen card, whereby we have history class equal to title, okay, class equal to price, and button class equal to btn. And we also have another div here, a second one, but we now added the difference in class here is that there is featured here, because if you look at your browser, you can see that this one is highlighted. That's the example of featured. Is a featured one. Is the featured class that was added there that is making that possible. Then history class equal to title and pro plan, and then b class equal to price, and then button select plan. You see, every other thing remains the same, but the only major difference we have here is this price card and price card hyphen what's featured, but every other thing remains the same inside both cards. Okay, let's move on. Okay, let's fly on inside both cards. So now let's look at our CSS and understand what is happening here. Now the first thing is dot pricing container. Now to help yourself in the area, I will advise you that all applications that you do, use the grid layouts for it. Don't use the Flexbox that often, except you have been able to master the Flexbox very, very effectively. But most times the grid layouts tends to provide a better option than the Flexbox. It's always better than the Flexbox. So you can see we have display ratio grid, and that's the layout we chose. And then grid have been template have been calling, we say repeat auto fit. Like this, it is automatically optimized for mobile. That's why you notice that when the screen adjusted, the whole thing, aligned properly. Then gap equal to 20 what pixel. That's the space that is going to appear. This is that gap you're seeing. The space between each of the grid items, and then padding 20 pixel. Internally, we're talking of the padding, the internal spacing. Are you getting me? That's exactly what we're talking about in that place. Of course, dot price card, we have the background. We give it a border, radius, a padding. We align the text to the center, and then native CSS nesting. We use and dot title. Are you getting me? Remember that we have something called title here, right? We have a class called what? Title. See it. We have a class called what? Title. So you use this and say dot title ampersand dot title color ratio. This ratio, you are able to give it, you use the hexadecimal color code, use the font size, dot price, the same thing. What we basically did here is that we did, because what we are referring to is the last thing that we styled must be the parent before we can use this. Altogether, if you look here now, every one of these things are all enclosed there. So the last thing we styled, so now we're trying to pick all the other classes in it and give them various kinds of what styles. Now after we finish with that, we now came and just have and featured. We created a box shadow and gave it a border. So what we basically did here, the only thing here is that we didn't want to now do, we could have still done dot price tag dot price. Like this could still work. We could have still closed this, and but this is just a modern way in CSS. That's why we call it, if you look at here, we call it native nesting. I think I call it native CSS what nesting, whereby you don't need to do it dot price tag dot title. You don't, instead of going there, you just do and dot title, you give it its own style, and dot ampersand dot price, you give it its own style, ampersand dot btn, you give it its own style, and so it goes up till the very end. And at that point, it gives us this beautiful, good looking pricing plan that we have here. Of course, in main application we have features, of each pricing plan. what each one carries and the other one does not carry. But as we progress, we'll learn more about this. But what I'm just trying to explain to us here is that when you look at, if you look at the way it is aligned, the way the whole features, the whole thing is positioned and programmed. If you look at it, just know that the grid supports is always a better option to use than the Flexbox. The Flexbox does not have native support already for mobile optimization, but the grid will automatically optimize your website for mobile. But in a situation whereby you are doing a very simple layout, if you feel that the grid can sometimes get complicated when it gets too bulky on a page, you advise to use a Flexbox because it's one dimensional, while the grid on the other hand is a two-dimensional layout pattern. Are we together? So in the absence of that, as you see that, please take note of that. Now if you look at here, I have an assignment for you. Of course, I'm not with you to know whether you did this assignment or you didn't do it. Of course, I'm not with you, but I encourage you, go and try out your hands on this take-home practical, just to be sure that you understood what we did. I'm also going to provide this manual, to you as you watch the class. You can also read the manual and practice by watching the guide, by seeing the guide in the manual. And that is the end of the class. Thank you and have a lovely day.